for today. My name's Christopher Findlay. I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon. I'm welcoming you to the annual conference of the Annual Conference on Trade and Investment in Services, organised by the TIISA network and co-hosted by the Institute for International Trade at the University of Adelaide and the China Institute for WTO Studies at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. The theme of the series of sessions on this week is servicification, and the topic today is issues and case studies. We've got 3 presentations, and I'll talk just in a moment about how that's going to work. But let me explain firstly about the format here. So this is a webinar. The panelists the speakers and panelists are connected to each other and can speak to each other. Other participants, very welcome. We'd ask you to join in the conversation using the Q&A button. The questions that you raise or the comments that you make will be shared with everyone. But what we're going to do is ask the speakers not to respond to them directly. It turns out what happens when speakers respond to those questions online, the questions disappear, and then we can't sort of follow up and have a further conversation about them. So what I'll do as the questions come in is accumulate them and then direct them to the speakers, and we'll deal with them that way. But please join in. Don't hesitate. As you think of something, jot it down through the Q&A. So as I said, I'll try and to use an Australian word, I'll try and muster them into groups and share them around. But if I miss one, or there's something extremely important that I haven't stressed enough, then please let me know again through the Q&A button. What we'll do is we've got 3 presentations. We'll take them one after the other. I'll do a quick check at the end of that to see whether the speakers want to have got a quick comment on the others that they've heard, and then we'll go to your questions and deal with those. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Speakers are going to be talking for 15 minutes or so. Like I said, we'll do one after the other and then come to the discussion time. So the first presentation today is from my colleague, Hein Rolfsma from Utrecht University. He's going to talk about some work on the Asian air cargo market and the recovery from COVID-19. And once Hein's finished, I'll introduce our other speakers. So Hein, over to you. So you'll need to unmute.
Unmute. I've seen it. Yeah, good morning. Christopher, quick check. Do you see my screen well? I think so. Okay, thanks. Indeed, this is joint work with the chair of this panel, actually, Christopher, who I work with for some time now. And also for the background of this paper is that we are engaged with a group of academics now, where he introduced me to especially around the ASEAN group. So there will be a bit of color in this paper about that. And Jan van der Waal, and he's actually, I want to say something about him because he plays a very prominent role in this paper. Is that when we were looking for data on this topic, like air cargo, we came across very interesting data on the website from Clive Data, which was quite a new kind of thing. And he turned out to be the founder and CEO of this big database and based in the Netherlands. So that is how we got to him, and he agreed to join this paper and this analysis. So I'm very happy to kick that off. So let me just oh, it stops. Let me do it this way then. Obviously, COVID-19 is hitting hard in the air cargo industry, and what you, of course, as a background, have to get from the air cargo is that much of this air cargo is transported in passenger flights. So you might think, okay, yes, you can have air cargo in itself without a lot of people or restrictions, but a large part of the market is wide-bodied jets. So that's one. Obviously, also you can say, well, there are major economic effects, and there's a high correlation in general between economic activity and air cargo. So if there is a recession going on, then obviously this air cargo falls hard. But on the other hand, there are also promising trends, of course, if you are in the air cargo business, because all around us we see that due to the pandemic, e-commerce is on the rise, which typically tends to favor air cargo. So there might be a multitude of factors playing a role here. Talking about value chains and servicification and the importance of services, then many of these shipping routes are an indicator for world trade or global value chains. You have the northern shipping line, the Baltics, that is an important indicator in the stock market about economic activities, but also the air cargo services routes are an important indicator for the functioning of global value chains and in general world trade. So that is why I talked about the feeling of the pulse at world trade as a title for the paper. A third introductory point that I'd like to stress is there is a bit of a feeling, not only me, but I think in general, that there are quite a few technological trends, obviously connected with a lot of digitalization, where the question is whether the current pandemic is actually speeding up trends that were already there. And before the crisis, there was already a lot going on in the air cargo sector with respect to business model transformation, due also to mainly also through the entry of new players like Amazon, who use big data to organize supply chains more effectively. And I will return to these changes in business models and the force of it at the end of the presentation. Now, I think that if you look at the literature, the academic literature on the effects of COVID, then there are quite a few analysis now on the let's say what I now call the early collapse effect. So the beginning, the first half of the year, or up to April, May, obviously there's some kind of a publication lag in this. So there's been a very recent special issue of Journal of Air Transport Management, the top journal in this field on these questions. But if we look at these, then I think there are a few things that may be addressed. So first is, what do we know about the market dynamics actually run up to the COVID crisis? Because it happened quite suddenly, and if you want to address the effects of it, we should also know a bit more about the run-up to that crisis and what tells us about this early dynamics that were going on in the market. And I'll say something more about that as well. So then my second point would be, yes, so we know quite a bit about the early collapse now through some papers. But if you look at the data, the more recent data that we have, and they will be high frequency data, which is quite unique, I think, in this market, because IATA and other bodies don't publish it that way. We do. Then you can see rebounds, and then the question is, what can we learn from those rebounds? It's not only collapse, but there's been all kinds of reactions, and we might find already a bit of clues in those for the transformation. And then the third one is that do we see clues, but also can we already discuss a bit, not in very broad terms, about the transformation in the industry, but do we already see some of these transformations and speeding up of transformations in the air cargo market by assessing what are the trends and how do the current suppliers deal with these changing events. So that's basically a bit of the questions that we're asking in this paper, and that I will also address in this presentation. So let me say something about the ASEAN market, ASEAN countries that we were following also in this group, but I've made this a bit broader also for the Asia Pacific. What we have done is we've looked at a data set that is huge, which is the OECD EBOPS data set, to some of the presenters also well known, which are bilateral trading services. So this is not what is in the planes that much, but actually the services themselves sold. We looked at outbound air cargo services towards well, at least two major OECD not members, because the European Union is not a member itself, but the data are aggregated for it. And what we've looked for is what is the level of air cargo services towards those markets as a share of the total world to those markets. So you get some kind of a market share, and also some measure for revealed comparative advantage, where you would ask the question, if there's growth in exports to the EU or the US, how is that growth related over a period of 6 times compared to the world growth, to get some feeling whether countries are strengthening their position. So if you eyeball this, then you can say, well, if you look at the ASEAN countries, you would see that compared to the US market positions that they have in general, except for Singapore, they as a market share, they are very significant. And also, if you look at the market share towards the European Union, actually it stays up quite well over the last year. So they're actually improving the market share to the European Union. And so for ASEAN countries, you might argue that the European Union is, well, tentatively becoming a more important market to consider. Now, there are all kinds of issues and challenges here, because exports of goods to the European Union and GVCs often is through the Middle East, to especially Dubai. Then it's difficult to measure these things. So there are several caveats, of course, in this analysis. If you look for other Asian countries, so also the big ones, you see, of course, for Korea, a large market share in the US, but for the other Asian countries, this position of the EU is far less pronounced, which would say was that there's a bit of a split, which probably people who are from Asia, like not me, but many in this panel as well, could probably grasp that there is this split in, let's say, the relative importance of that. So one of my first kind of things is that if we talk about trading routes between ASEAN countries and the EU, we have to realize that as a benchmark, these are quite important and increasingly important as a pulse for world trade from Asia. Now, my second thing is, and I think that's also the main novelty of the paper, is that we have used the data from Clive. And what is actually, before I go over this maybe slightly detailed graph, of which I will say a bit more in a minute, there are a few things about these data that it tries to, as a consultancy, Clive tries to assess. So the first one is that if you look at most of the data in the market, they are about weight. So what the load factor is about weight. But if you look at much of the air travel for the last 10 years, then the restricting factor for cargo is not weight but volume. And what they do is that they collect from a huge number of clients that they have, especially, I must say, also in Europe. They collect the data on volume on top of freight, so that you have a better idea how that might actually work. The second thing that is interesting about the data is that it's not published and collected on a monthly basis, like IATA is doing basically, but on a weekly basis. So you get far more high frequency data, and that has proven to be quite important also in because of the, let's say, the current rapid changes, that for planning perspectives and also for big data analytics, you need a bit more fine-grained components. The last thing that I will not present that is important is that they are able to make a split between measuring outbound freight only, but also where it actually ends up. And that is an analysis that we're still doing, but I will not present. But that's a third one where you can make a far better idea about, for example, global value chains, if you know where the cargo actually ends up. Let me tell something about this graph. So what you see is the volume index is the darkest solid line, and you see it's a bit like starting in 1990. You see this big drop everywhere, but it's different. So you see very big drops in Singapore and Thailand. Also, you see them everywhere. But there are two things to see, is that you, instead of actually looking only at the collapse until, let's say, April, you see a bit of a rebound as well. So and that is that you see also the load factor, which is the second, let's say, a solid line, which is a bit less dark. You see in most cases, in several cases, you see the load factor going up. Now this load factor is the percentage, let's say, that the planes are full, and then especially the dynamic load factor. This is driven by the volume. Now you might expect that, of course, if you have lower capacity as well, that the load factor for the ones that go up. But obviously, this is a managerial challenge that you have to address. Now, I'd like to bring out that this kind of analysis, so because of the limiting of time, so let us look at the difference between Singapore and Thailand. So the interesting thing, if you look at this graph, is that Singapore's load factors already start off before the crisis at close to 100%, or at least very short. So they are very efficient in a sense of the sector, where this is far less the case in Thailand. On the other hand, if you look at the volume index, then the recovery in Singapore of the crisis is, let's say, not very pronounced, where it is very pronounced in Thailand. And because we now have the right load factor in terms of volume, the big difference is that although starting off from a lower point, the Thailand, and then especially, of course, Bangkok, if you look at it, has been able to increase efficiency in the load factor quite dramatically as a response to the crisis. This can be due, of course, that they had excess capacity, but at least they succeeded in doing that. So that is like kind of a thing. The other thing that is interesting is that there are countries like Vietnam and the Philippines who have, let's say, a double dip in this, whereas Singapore and Thailand have this, and that could be connected, although these, of course, are not that many observations, to differences in situations in COVID itself and in measures that they take. But there's much more to be seen here in the data, but we're very happy to do that. So let me say something about the changes to wrap this up also. So I think that there are quite a few changes in the air cargo industry already that might speed up. So first is that there is this technological trend to have extreme long hauls. So that is driven by the business by business flights, but it's connecting point to point on a far larger distance. Now, clearly, there's an interest in combining this with the air cargo market. So that's one. The other one is in the market you have these long hauls, which is often also sea rolls, traffic, and then you have this last mile where you see flights being, well, at least there's this drones and robotics issue. Artificial intelligence, very important. Amazon has entered the market, and the idea is where you can predict markets better using big data. You can also be far more efficient in actually the load factors that you might have. And if you think about COVID effects and limiting physical connections, you immediately talk about blockchain technology and fintechs coming in to streamline the process for which you have far less administrative contacts. And then there is this big thing about networks, how all this relates to the building efforts of governments with respect to airports and building supply chains. So I think that for business model dynamics, you see, to get all this right, and that might be speeded up because of the challenges of COVID, of integrating stuff more seamlessly, is that many of these are working from only air cargo supply, more towards FedEx, DHL, of actually managing full supply chains or playing a role in a supply chain. The other one is integrating with technology giants. So you see that if Amazon is successful in big data, you might see this Alibaba effect coming where you combine this. I think the third one, what is important, is that there's this analysis in the market that especially the Gulf operators like Emirates and Qatar Air, who rely a lot also on passenger travel as well, without having home markets, are the ones that are most vulnerable to survive the crisis. So although this might be a bit of vulture kind of thing, you see also for Asian carriers, the idea is, okay, if they challenge, maybe there is room in the market for us together with some other to take them. And then there is a stay of the e-commerce. And if you look at China's air cargo industry, has gained hugely from that. But with everything, you see a shift of production maybe coming out of China towards Vietnam, but also to other countries like Cambodia, whether there is a bit like maybe ideas to team up also more closely in the supply chains with players from Europe like Zalando. Policy responses, options for that, my last slide. I think that in general, you will see a huge increase in life cycle thinking, like how can we use public procurement in these markets, also with infrastructure to go after sustainability goals, so a connection between post-COVID packages for industry revival, how can they shape environmental concerns better and the building. Liberalization efforts to quickly speed up things, and I think that there are huge issues in the market on how do we, on the one hand, support national carriers, but on the other hand, don't overburden them with public governance. So thanks for this kickoff, Christopher.
Good, thanks very much, Hein. And like you, I think that new data set is really interesting and potentially very valuable, and we'll see later if people have comments and suggestions on the direction of its use. So let me turn straight away to the second presentation it's a paper on services liberalization and industrial pollution. There's an author team from China, Yue Lu from UIBE, Yongchang Chen from UIBE, and Yue Hua from Hunan University. And Yue Hua is going to make the presentation today. So let me turn over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Hello. Hey, okay, so let me share my screen with you. Yue Lu, you have something to say? No. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I just mentioned. Thank you, Professor Friendly. My co-author, Professor Hua, will present the paper for us, and he came from Hunan University. That's all, and I will do the Q&A part.
Okay, that's a good deal. All right, over to you, Yue Hua.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, can you see my slides? Hello, can you see my PowerPoint slides?
Yes, all good.
Oh, okay, great. Hello everyone. So this is a paper that we look at how the services liberalization affect the industrial pollution, and we got some data from Chinese firms. So this is a joint work with Yue Lu and Yongchang Chen. All right. So the motivation here is that trading services, as we all know, it's a pretty dynamic component of international trade. It has taken a large part of the trade, and it's expanding rapidly, especially in the developing economies. Okay, so there's a World Trade Report last year that talks focus on the services trade. So it is quite important, and we have seen a lot of studies on the economic benefits, okay, on the efficiency and growth that has been delivered by the services openings. So we believe this part is well understood. However, we see a relatively scarce research on the environmental consequences of services liberalization, okay, and so we believe they are kind of overlooked. So the contribution of this paper is we believe that we provide the first evidence on the domestic environmental effects, okay, of services liberalization. We use unique matched firm level data, while we also proposes a novel services liberalization index, okay, and we address some policy-based heterogeneities. And also we examine some production side mechanisms on like why there's a relationship between the services liberalization and the pollution. So we believe we add to the broader literature on trade environment relationship, especially for the large developing economies. All right. So just in case of time, so first give a very brief summary of the main findings of the paper. We find that upstream service liberalization reduces air pollution for industrial firms. Okay, and the finding is robust to alternative air pollutants, to modified indices, and also to the instrumental variable estimates. Okay, and for the heterogeneity analysis, we find stronger pollution reduction effects for larger firms and foreign firms. Okay, and we find different pollution reduction effects among different service sectors. Okay, and lastly, for the mechanisms, we identify the composition effect and the technique effect, okay, as the potential underlying mechanisms. All right, so here's the related literature. This is like a whole bunch of literature on trade and pollution. So, but first, the most related literature is those who talks about the economic effects of service liberalization. So we got like 2 papers from Arnold on the productivity of manufacturing firms. We got 2 papers on that looks at the effects of service liberalization on technology imports and innovation. And we also find a report from the WTO. The name is GATS, Facts and Fiction. It talks about the effects of service liberalization on transparency, predictability, and the long-term investment. So these are some of the economic effects that has been identified by the previous literature. Also, a broader literature that relates to our study is the literatures on trade and pollution. Okay, we noticed that there's like a serial works by Copeland and Taylor, okay, that talks about the relationship between trade and pollution, and some relatively new studies. Okay, like some of them published on Journal of International Economics, like by the trade liberalization and air pollution. Okay, there are actually some counter evidences here, like the 2017 paper finds trade liberalization tend to reduce air pollution, while this Shapiro and Walker paper finds that trade does not explain pollution reduction. Okay, and we have a pretty new paper just coming out in a Journal of International Economics, and that talks about exports in China affect infant mortality. Okay, and one of the major mechanisms here is air pollution. Okay, all right. So next, we just move to our empirical model. So it's a pretty simple panel model with fixed effects. We have dependent variable here, that is the pollution at firm level, and we have an index that represents the degree of upstream services liberalization for industry. Okay, so we don't have like the data on services liberalization for each firm, but instead we can identify them at the industry level. Okay, and we do have a bunch of firm level control variable, including the firm's profit, productivity, scale, value added tax, and firm age. Okay, and we have also controlled for a bunch of fixed effects. And besides these plain OLS specification, we also uses the instrumental variable approach, okay, to deal with the potential endogeneity bias. So the first instrument we use is the historical degree of upstream services liberalization. So it's like a time-lagged term of the services liberalization. And the second, we use the OECD FDI regulatory restrictiveness index in India. Okay, so because we believe there's a strong correlation between the service sector in India and in China. Okay, so this is basically our identification strategy. And next, I'm gonna just briefly introduce how we construct these services liberalization index here. Okay, so if you look at the right-hand side of the equation, there is a regulation index here. Okay, we constructed based on China's guidance catalog for foreign investments, which in this catalog, the industries are divided into 4 categories. Okay, so they're divided by the restrictiveness of the foreign investment. So the first is the industries are prohibited, okay, for the foreign investment. The second would be restricted. The third would be unregulated, and the fourth will be encouraged. Okay, so there's basically 4 categories of industries in terms of their foreign investment regulation. Okay, so that is the reason why we use the following 3. We use the following 3 indices to construct this index. Okay, so the first one is if the firm investment in upstream service sector J of the industry I is prohibited, okay, and equals 0 otherwise. And the second index is if this upstream service sector J is prohibited or restricted. Okay, so it's a little bit more relaxed than the first one. And to account for all the situations, we use the third index here that equals 2 if this industry, this upstream industry is prohibited, and equals 1 if it's restricted, equals 0 if it's unregulated, and equals -1 if it's encouraged. Okay, and also we have, because for a specific manufacturing industry has like multiple upstream services sectors, so we have multiplied these index by a weight, and this weight is constructed by the intermediate input share from service industry J. Okay, so that is basically we sum up these regulation index for each upstream industry, so we obtain the regulation industry for this manufacturing industry I. Okay, so basically the larger this index is, it means that the lower level of services liberalization. Okay, so this basically a larger index here means a lower level of service liberalization. All right. Okay, so here is like a brief graph of the 3 services liberalization index we have constructed. And you can see this is from 1998 to 2012, which is the our data covered, the time period covered by our data. Okay. So next, I just give you a very brief introduction of the data we use. We have used the annual survey of industrial firms, which is the most widely used firm level data in China. We got some basic information on firms from this data set. And we got the pollution emission data from the Chinese Environmental Statistical Database. Okay. And also, as we have mentioned, we calculate these services liberalization indices from the guidance catalog and also the input-output tables. Okay, and we also utilize these Chinese firm patent database basically for our mechanism to the test of our mechanisms. Okay, so basically the data is matched by the ASIF data and these environmental statistical data. So we come up with over 27,000 above scale manufacturing firms in China, okay, within the time period of 1998 to 2012. Okay, so next, we're gonna just jump into our empirical results. So first, here it gives you a summary of the descriptive statistics. Okay, so if you look at these 3 index here, services 1, services 2, and services 3, they're actually not very large. Okay, they're actually quite small in their magnitude. Okay, and we will provide explanations on the associated results. Okay, so let's just directly go into our baseline results here. So here, for the first 2 columns, we have the index of the first services index. Column 3 and column 4 is for the second index, and for the column 5 and 6 is for the third services liberalization index. All right, so you can see the results. They are just pretty robust to be significantly positive. Okay, which means the more liberalized services sector, okay, helps to reduce air pollution. Okay, and we have control for a bunch of firm level control variables here, and also the fixed effects here. Okay, so next we proceed to conduct a bunch of robustness checks. So first, we have considered there are kind of what we call indirect inputs, okay? Because when the service sector has supplied the inputs to the manufacturing sector, okay, the inputs itself has includes some of the services factors from other service sectors, okay? So there's like a input for the input, okay? So there are some, like we call indirect inputs here. And if we consider these inputs, okay, the services liberalization index might be underestimated. All right. So the second is we use a more detailed industry code, okay, which we, in order to identify more detailed industries in China. Okay. So the previous code we use is the 3-digit code. Okay. And here we use the 4-digit code, which is more detailed classification of the industries in China. Okay, and also we use an alternative dummy values, especially for the third regulation index. Okay, recall that we use 1, 2, 0, and -1. Okay, and so here we just change these values. Okay, to see if the results stays robust. All right, so if you can see, the results are pretty robust. Even if they change in the magnitude, they stay positive. and statistically significant. All right. Next, there are, okay, here we change the air pollutants. So basically, we're changing the dependent variable, okay? So in the main model, we use the SO2 emission. But here, we change the SO2 emission into industrial soot and industrial waste gas, okay? So these are like two different measures of the air pollution, okay? And you can see the results are still quite robust to the 3 services liberalization index. Okay, so next we just get into our instrumental variable results. Okay, so basically we have 3 instruments here. First, we use a historical services index. We use a relatively old catalog to calculate the level of services liberalization in China. Okay, we use the guidance catalog in 1995. Okay, so this is the first IV we choose, and there are 2 other instrumental variables. That is the services liberalization in India. Okay, the first one is calculated using the direct input method, and the second one is using a complete input method, right? So basically, so the first column here is the first stage. Okay, the first stage, you can see there's an F value here is pretty large, so which means the instrumental variable has a strong correlation with the endogenous variable. And the second column here is the estimation results from the 2-stage least squares, right? And we can see for the column 1, 3, and 5, the first stage is the relationship is pretty clear, and for column 2, 4, and 6, if you look at these 3 coefficients here, the results still robust. Okay, still indicates that the services liberalization in China is reducing air pollution. All right. Okay, so we hope that this instrumental variable approach kind of help to alleviate the endogeneity problem. But we need to be careful when we explain the results, because we all know that the instrumental variable only captures the local average treatment effects. Okay, so there might still be a bias there, but up to now, this is the best we can do. Okay. Okay, so next we proceed to conduct some heterogeneity analysis, right? So first we try to look at if firms of different scale and ownership have different response to the services liberalization differently. Okay, so first we look at firms if the scale matters. Okay, so the firm scale here is measured by a bunch of variables, like the firm's revenue, the firm's employment, stuff like that. So to classify firms into different scales. Okay, and if you look at this interaction term here, you can see the positive and statistically significant results. Okay, which means that larger firms of larger scales, they tend to reduce more air pollution emission, okay, if the services liberalization increases. Okay, and next we look at firm ownership here. Okay, and so this interaction term is this is the foreign-owned enterprises in China. Okay, so we can see the results. It's positive and significant, which means for the foreign-owned enterprises, okay, there's a significant pollution reduction effect. However, when we look at the state-owned enterprises here, okay, you look at this last interaction term, you can see it's actually statistically insignificant. Okay, which means we don't see the state-owned enterprises different from other types of firms. Okay. All right, and next we have done some of the heterogeneity analysis by service sectors, okay? Because our data allows us to identify the actual sectors, and we divide the sectors into finance, technology, telecommunication, transportation, and distribution, okay? So for all these 5 sectors, so the results is pretty robust, but it varies substantially in its magnitude. Okay, so if you look at the technology sectors, okay, the pollution reduction effect is quite large actually compared to the other 4 sectors. Okay, the technological change may be extremely responsive or sensitive to services liberalization, okay, in terms of pollution reduction. All right, so lastly, we did some tests on the potential mechanisms. So just following the traditional environmental economics literatures here, okay? So the first is we test if the service liberalization increases the output, okay? And the second, if it changes the capital structure of the firms. And third, if it increases the, it promotes the technological change, okay, within firms. Okay, so the result basically shows first we have increased output, but we have decreased the capital, and we have increased technological upgrades or